Hey guys, we're here for our next panel. We have Luke Youngblood from Coinbase Custody and Nick Kunkel from MakerDao. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah. We have feedback. Okay, it's better now, I think.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself, or should I go first? What do you want to do?
Okay, Nick, just refresh your browser.
Is there feedback when I talk, by the way?
No.
Okay, good. Thanks. Yeah, I'm coming to you live from a nanotech ship, and I'm currently cruising through the blood vessels, blasting coronavirus in the background.
Okay, how are we looking now?
Perfect.
Awesome. Yep, so my name is Nicholas Kunkel. I'm the head of backend services at MakerDao. Where one of the primary things I focus on is our Oracle stack.
And hi, I'm Luke Youngblood, and I work at Coinbase. I'm a staff software engineer there, and I've been at Coinbase for about a year, focused mainly on staking, but also on Oracles now. And prior to Coinbase, I worked for Amazon for a few years. We're excited to be here. I was part of the staking summit a couple months back, so it's great to be here and talk about Oracles with you. Cool. So before I guess, Nick, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about the Maker Oracles that you work on, and then I'll talk a little bit about Coinbase Oracle that we just launched. I think most people probably just saw the session right before this, which I didn't watch yet, but Andre was talking about our Oracle.
Okay, yeah, sure. So Maker's Oracles have kind of been around for forever. So when we started kind of single collateral DAI back in 2018, there weren't really any oracles to kind of plug and play and use. So we ended up having to make our own, and they ended up being quite popular and getting integrated into all kinds of different DeFi protocols. So when we were kind of designing multi-collateral DAI, we knew we needed to kind of take the next step in our Oracle infrastructure as well. So what we've done with what we call kind of Oracles v2 is it's kind of a completely, what we consider a decentralized Oracle stack that is completely controlled by the MakerDao governance. So they control kind of what kind of oracles are launched, what price sources are queried, who should kind of be the intermediaries for querying that data and then pushing that data on chain. So right now, what we've effectively done is we've onboarded a bunch of different DeFi projects to kind of run this concept of what we call a feed. So right now we have DYDX, we have Set Protocol, we have 0x, we have Gnosis, and we also have the Maker Foundation. So those are each running a feed in our kind of Oracle v2 stack.
That's awesome. Yeah, and so at Coinbase, we recently launched Coinbase Oracle. And this idea actually came out of a hackathon project that Andre and I did last fall. So just to give you a little bit of background on it, prior to building the Oracle, we were thinking about, Coinbase has all this great price data coming from the Pro exchange. Why is that data not available on chain for use in DeFi applications? And we thought that, Coinbase is in this unique position where people trust us as an exchange, and if we sign the prices with a cryptographic key, so they're available on chain, people know they haven't been manipulated, and people were already posting our prices on chain anyways, right? But the difference was you had to trust the poster. So in the previous scenario, it was like you weren't sure if the price really came from Coinbase Pro or if it was manipulated because I wanted to do some harm to the ecosystem. So so we thought, why not sign this data and make it available? And then we put some thought into, well, should we post it on chain ourselves directly? that was one thing we thought about doing. The fees are rather high, and we were also concerned that during times of network congestion, it would be difficult to post prices. And also, we think that allowing multiple posters to post the sign prices makes the system more resilient, because you could have like half a dozen or a dozen different interested parties like Maker and others that are probably interested in having that signed price data on chain, and they're willing to post it for us and pay the fees to do that. And so we thought that'll make it more resilient. And then this was really just what we launched was just a minimum viable product to get it out the door, but we do plan on extending it pretty soon. So, some of the new features we'll probably want to add really quickly are, right now we have Bitcoin and Ethereum prices, but we want to add a volume field that's signed so that people can generate volume weighted average prices over time. And we want to add more assets as well. But we have to think really carefully through the implications of adding more assets that might be less heavily traded than Bitcoin and Ethereum. And we can talk more about how we would secure these new assets. But yeah, I'm really curious, Nick, as to how do you kind of secure your data sources? Because I think that's where it all starts.
Yeah, I mean, I have to commend you guys for kind of signing your price data. This solves one of the very, very big problems that has been associated with oracles, right? To me, there's two big problems. There's data integrity, right? And you touched on this, right? How do I know, if as a user of a DeFi protocol that, when some feed is saying I'm using Coinbase's price, that they're actually using your price, that they haven't manipulated the data. So I call that kind of data integrity. And you guys signing your prices solves that problem. The second is kind of censorship, right? How do you ensure that someone is going to actually be providing this continuous stream of Coinbase's prices, on chain? And so both of those kind of come down to kind of alignment of incentives. So I touched on this kind of earlier, where when I said that we have a bunch of DeFi projects that are running these feeds, it's not just a feel good type of thing. It's an actual discussion around security, right? So what these organizations are effectively doing is they all have a brand and a reputation in the ecosystem, and so they're effectively staking their reputation, right? So if they're running a feed and they decide to either manipulate the data in some way and participate in an Oracle attack, right? Let's say DYDX does that. They will never be able to work in this ecosystem again. No one would trust them. No one would use their products. Similarly, to a censorship attack, right? If any one of them just stopped kind of reporting prices, in unison, you would know exactly kind of who did this, right? So there's this accountability aspect that really incentivizes everyone to kind of stay in line. And you guys are really a critical piece to really solving both of those problems by signing your data.
Thank you. Yeah, and so I think the way we kind of think about how we secure the source data that we sign, so obviously there's kind of two components in that, and one is having a good source of liquidity or for your price data. So making sure that like the markets that you sign prices for are very heavily traded. There's a lot of volume. There's a lot of liquidity. Making sure that like a big whale can't move the price very much. And so if you're signing prices from a thinly traded market, you have to kind of worry about those type of attacks, that someone with a lot of money that wants to cause something bad to happen could potentially drive the price up or down by simply putting in a big order. And so that's one aspect of it, is like making sure that your market itself is very heavily traded and very liquid so that there's good price discovery there. And then the other aspect is really kind of I really put a lot of thought into is like, how do we secure the actual act of generating signatures themselves? And this is where I think Coinbase is sort of in a unique position, in that if you think about what Coinbase represents, it essentially represents the ability to generate secure cryptographic signatures. Every time Coinbase customers send Bitcoin or Ethereum or any cryptocurrency off the exchange, we have to sign a transfer transaction. And so over the years, Coinbase has invested very heavily in securing all the infrastructure, the people, the processes, the tools that go into generating cryptographic signatures for Bitcoin transactions in a very secure way. And so we're able to leverage that same pipeline of people, process, and tools. You'll see many of those same practices that you might see, like in the military, like on a nuclear sub, the two Navy commanders that both have to turn the key to launch the nukes, right? You see a lot of those kind of practices in our internal processes. Like I can't modify the Oracle by myself. I must go get approvals from other engineers that have to look at my code and make sure it's good. I'll make sure I'm not doing anything nefarious. And so those same safety controls are the way that pretty much all the big exchanges have to secure the systems. And so I think we can leverage that same infrastructure, that same tooling that generates secure cryptographic signatures for Bitcoin to generate signatures for price data or any other data that we want to eventually put on chain. And so that was kind of the realization for me that, like, hey, we have to build this thing because we're uniquely positioned that we can do it. And then we have to, as we want to extend it, we have to put a lot of thought into how we're going to do that. So for example, already we want to add new assets, like we want to add DAI, we want to add REP, ZRX, BAT, KNC, Link. We want to add all signatures, sign prices for all these assets because they'll be valuable to the ecosystem. But we just want to put a little thought into it before we add them. We want to see how people are making use of the price data first to make sure that we're not going to create any systemic vulnerabilities in the DeFi ecosystem when we add those signed prices for additional assets.
I think it's great that you guys are taking like a very measured response to this and doing things slowly and thinking them through. In particular, I like that you kind of mentioned you guys are thinking of signing other types of data as well. So particular interest is things like the volume data and the timestamp, because that allows kind of us as data consumers to use like more advanced like price modeling strategies. So right now, if you just sign kind of the last price, the strategies that people can utilize that for are things like, either a direct line in from Coinbase or some kind of median or some kind of mean. But if we want to use more advanced strategies like a volume weighted average price or like a time sensitive over like an interval volume weighted average price, we need to have those other types of data signed as well to kind of complete the loop in terms of data integrity.
Absolutely. Yeah. We really want to add volume soon. And then another thing that I'm really inspired by is the Uniswap team, that their version 2 of their Oracle, they've developed this method called time weighted average price, which is super interesting. It means you have to wait for you're always kind of looking back at like maybe 30 or 60 minutes of price data, because you have to wait it over that time window to get a more stable price. But it introduces a lot of additional security, and it makes it so that one price outlier is not going to move things in a way that you don't expect. And so it won't work for all use cases, but I think it's really interesting, and we should investigate those methods a little more. So we talked about securing data at the source. And then I think there's some other interesting aspects to that. And one of the things we've been thinking about, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, Nick, is we've been thinking about how do we, let's say that the price jumps or drops quite a lot in a short period of time. Like, what's the responsible thing to do? Is it to post the new price, the really high or low price immediately, or is it to maybe not? In some ways, we think it's actually safer to just not sign the price if it's really crazy and just wait a little while for the price to settle down. And so there's a number of ways we could do that. Like with linear regression, we could potentially say if this is like, more than X standard deviations from the previous, 20 prices, we could not sign it. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts of how you're thinking about like filtering before things hit the blockchain itself or before things hit Ethereum.
So my opinion is more that you guys just sign kind of everything no matter what. I'm kind of always of the opinion that more data is better. And then on the user side, right, we can filter out, have our own kind of filtering mechanism of, what are our own things, So you mentioned like, okay, maybe there's some kind of trigger if, your X number of standard deviations away from the previous price, or from some other reference price. Personally, I would rather do all of that kind of data filtering on our end rather than on the data source end. And the reason is because if we see other exchanges start kind of signing their data as well, which I really hope they see you guys take the lead and follow suit, then what we really want to have is we want to have kind of consistency across the data set. And I think rather than the entire industry kind of agreeing on a model that they're all going to use, for filtering and such, I think it's much easier to just kind of agree to, you post the raw data and you let everyone else kind of figure it out after that. Because otherwise, if we start, pulling in data from Coinbase and from Kraken and from Gemini, they all have different kind of thresholds for which they sign or will not sign something. It starts to have kind of unforeseen kind of consequences on our end.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's one of the things we really want to see happen, and I would love to see this, is for other exchanges, Binance, Kraken, Gemini, to all sign prices, because where this gets really useful is when you have at least three, right? You can generate a median price across all three. And that's already being done today, and every Oracle pretty much is doing this. But like for example, the Open Oracle contract that we integrated with, that Compound created, they have this concept of the Delphi price, right? Where they and so this is sort of the on-chain filtering, right? Where you, in the contract itself, if a single price from a single exchange deviates too much from the median price, then they can ignore that. And then in other cases, you can decide as consumer, if you're creating an Oracle contract, you can decide how you want to filter it. So for the Compound example, I believe if the price is more than 10% higher or lower in a short window of time, they will filter that price. So they've decided, like, hey, we're going to wait, and that might not work for every use case, but as a creator of an Oracle contract, you can decide how you want to protect your downstream consumers. But I also think it's important that people that use the contracts that exist on chain, that they're aware of what decisions were made that went into creating the contract, because you really want to understand deeply whether or what the different optimizations were, right? I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think at Maker we kind of took a slightly different approach, in that we have this kind of real-time kind of Oracle contract, but that's actually not the price that's used in multi-collateral DAI. We actually put this kind of buffer contract in between the Oracle and the Maker protocol, called what we call the Oracle security module. And it's really a kind of a delay function. So any price that comes in, it will delay by 1 hour. So everyone is kind of aware of what the price will be 1 hour from now in the Maker protocol. And so this kind of serves a multitude of purposes. For users, it's kind of nice because they know an hour in advance when their position is going to get liquidated. So they can go and they can pay off some of their debt, or they can, add more collateral to, secure their position more, in order to stop themselves from getting liquidated. And so that's kind of cool for users. But the main reason that we have it is actually as a kind of as the name might infer, as a security aspect. Because if there is an Oracle attack, right? If some set of parties do collude, to either censor the price, to put in a zero price, to put in, an infinite price, those all would affect the Maker protocol in really severe ways, right? Someone could mint, millions of unbacked DAI, or someone could liquidate every single position in the protocol. So what we really need is like a full stop mechanism to just say, you know what, no, we don't want that price. And so this 1 hour delay allows us to do that, in that it gives Maker governance the opportunity to freeze the Oracle security module contract if they deem that the price is malicious in some way. And so this is completely decentralized. The keys are not held by Maker. They're not held by any individuals. It's really all up to governance. And it's kind of funny because as much flack as Maker gets for the events of Black Thursday, One of the things that the community did actually do really, really well once they saw these events unfold was to freeze the Oracle, right? Was to stem the bleeding and stop more and more positions from getting liquidated and being sent to auction. And so, as bittersweet of an event as that was, it did kind of validate the kind of security assumptions that we built our oracles around.
That's great. Yeah. I think it's also a really hard problem to solve. But you don't want to be so centralized that your team has an admin key to the contract and they can just shut it down, because that's obviously really risky. It's not really decentralized at all. But you need mechanisms, and I think that's a great example of building like a safety switch in, or like a break glass in place of in case of emergency button that you can shut things down, or just pause things to let the market cool off a bit during liquidity crunch like we saw. So I think that's fantastic. And so I would just encourage teams that are building to try to think about ways they can introduce governance mechanisms that are not centralized, that give you some ability to help secure the DeFi protocol. So I see some good questions here in the chat. Do you want to try to taking some of these? There's one or two here. There's one from Aaron Shar, and I'll just read it. How is this different from Coinbase posting price vol info to a contract they create, I assume? Why would multiple people posting the same data on ETH is good? So basically, we put some thought into this. We could have just deployed our own contract and been the only poster posting price data to that. But the reality is that it would have cost a lot in fees, not a huge amount, a few $1,000s a month, perhaps, depending on how often you want to post the price data, but it's still not inexpensive. And then the other aspect is that during periods of high volume, we might not be able to publish the prices reliably. And if we were the only poster and we had an outage and downtime and people depended on our Oracle, that would be a kind of a systemic risk for the downstream consumers of that Oracle. So the nice thing about putting it in the Pro API is that anyone can grab the price free of charge. You do need a Coinbase Pro account. You have to create an API key. It's a view-only API key, but anyone can do that. And the price is available free of charge. And so as long as there are multiple posters, as long as there's a few people posting, as long as not every single poster is offline, the price will get posted. It also gives DeFi lenders and others the opportunity to refresh prices more frequently. So for example, if I'm a lender, I probably don't want to liquidate positions immediately. I might want to actually post a new signed price and see if the position needs to really be liquidated or not. So it gives people the opportunity to kind of decide how fresh they need that data to be. And it incentivizes the people that are already economically incentivized to have good data on chain to post it and pay the fees. And so we think it's actually more resilient to allow multiple posters. And yeah, that's kind of the thought process that went into that. I hope that answered your question. What do you think about that topic, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with your reasoning, especially during, when the network is really congested, and that tends to be when, there's big price movements in the markets. I don't think people really want to rely on Coinbase to, for actually getting those transactions through. I think we'd have, a much better conscience if we just knew you guys were signing data, and then anyone can grab and then sling that data on chain, right? It's a much more resilient approach to getting Coinbase data on chain, right? Because some actors may be much more incentivized than Coinbase is, to get those prices in those moments.
Totally, yeah. And some of the things we're thinking of adding that we've been talking to a few teams that are actually using it already. It's been really great to hear the positive response. So thank you to everyone in the community that's really kind of reached out and said thanks to us. But some of the features we're thinking of adding are, right now when you query the Oracle, you just get the latest price. So we're thinking about just adding the ability to query for an older price. If you don't want the latest price tick, you might want a price from like an hour ago or a day ago. So we'll probably add that in the next few weeks or so. That seems like a really easy feature to add. We're already storing all the signed prices in our database. So that's something we'll probably add pretty soon. The volume field that we talked about earlier, we'll probably add that. And then we also want to add, we think we'll probably want to add other signature message payload formats. So if you have, this is kind of a call out to the entire community, but if for some reason the message payload doesn't work for your application in some way, please let us know. And I think eventually we want to include message payloads and signature formats that would be valid on more than just Ethereum. So there might be other networks that people want to broadcast these prices to. And so these are all things we'd love to hear feedback on.
So off the top of my head, some other things I might be interested in would be the prices from the BidAsk Spread. So for some price models, instead of using the last trade price in an order book, sometimes we actually prefer taking the midpoint of the highest bid and the lowest ask. It kind of gives a better snapshot of kind of where the market is at the moment, especially when spreads are large for more liquid assets.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So we're actually querying our internal candle service, and we already get that data. So we're just not signing that data. But that would be relatively easy to add those fields to the message payload or as an additional message payload so that we have backwards compatibility with existing Oracle users. But yeah, that's a great idea. I think we'll probably include that. There's a question in the channel from Aaron again. Can you sign all data coming from the API? So theoretically we could. However, here's the challenge. So the system we're using to generate the signatures is backed by hardware security modules. So we take this pretty seriously in the sense that the private key material is pretty well protected. Now those hardware security modules, they can't sign at like the thousands of requests per second that the Coinbase APIs get. So if we're just returning a single signed price that's like for a minute worth of trading data, which is what we do today, we just generate that signature once a minute and we store the result in a database, and everyone that asks for that signature gets the same message payload and the same signed price. But you can imagine for APIs that are very high volume that traders use, if we signed every request response from those, that could be it could require a lot of signing infrastructure. So it'd be pretty heavy infrastructure lift to do that. And then you kind of already get that from TLS anyways. If you're just like hitting an API, right, you have transport layer security, you have SSL, that kind of gives you some assurance you're talking to Coinbase's server. However, being able to put that data on chain would be really nice. So as we start looking at other market data we might be able to sign. If there's ways we can do that, like cache the signatures like we're doing for the prices, that would be awesome. We'll continue to look into that. Okay, Shinju said last question. Any final questions? Actually, Nick, any final thoughts to close us out?
I'm just happy to see that kind of the Oracle space is getting the attention in terms of kind of innovation. I think we kind of stagnated for a few years with nothing kind of new really coming out, nothing different. And I think what you guys are doing now with the status signing is really going to change things. And so, thanks for driving this forward.
Thank you. Likewise, I know your team is driving forward a lot of Oracle initiatives, and I'm really impressed. I think the whole concept of
I'll give you a heads up before I put them over, but they're almost done talking.
Okay, so I think we're pretty much done. Thank you everyone for attending. It was a really great session. It was a great conversation, Nick.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Luke. Was great chatting with you, and thank you for having us on. This has been great.
Thanks, guys. This was awesome. Take care. We're gonna